Hello, welcome to Interdependent Study, our podcast where we engage in the learning and unlearning work for collective liberation. I'm Damien.
And I'm Aaron. Thank you so much for joining us today. Each week, we'll bring something new to the table and discuss our thoughts and feelings about it through the lenses of who we are and where we can go for a more just society.
That's right. We want Interdependent Study to be a space where we're always learning with one another. And Aaron, you're up this week, this crazy week of ours. What are you bringing to the table today?
Well, did something happen that we should talk about first? So. I have an article that we'll talk about. But
yes, a really great article.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert.
Might solve some of the problems that occurred this week.
I'll say more about that.
Yeah, so Donald Trump was reelected this week. It just sounds so surreal to say it out loud.
It really does.
I don't know how many times. I haven't said it that many times.
I haven't said that full statement out loud.
No. Yeah, so that's the reality, and I think so. We'll see. You know, we started this little podcast here on January 6th, 2021.
Was that another special day and week?
Yeah.
Anything happened that day?
Which was, you know, that was surreal in a different way.
Yes.
But we are older than the insurrection. That's so if you're looking for levity, that's the levity I got for you this week. And yeah, we'll see where this goes with President. He's promised a lot of things. I think he's also a delusional old man who doesn't entirely have all of his faculties, but is still full of vitriol and hate for a lot of people. And so, yeah, well, I mean, I don't know.
I don't know either. I think one of the things I've been doing over the past few days is obviously talking to a lot of folks, family and friends. And particularly I think about kind of what has become really central to me as sort of the advice I've been giving to folks and the advice I've been trying to give to myself, which is just this idea of do what you can to take care of yourself. Do what you can to take care of the people that you love and focus on the things that you can control. I think that's sort of been the central message that I've been trying to share and trying to live for myself, because I think for a lot of folks, and especially folks who look like me and the conversations I've had, we are still angry. We are still sad. And I think we have every right to be. And, you know, we'll see what comes of this next presidency. But I think in the moment now, all we can do is take care of ourselves and take care of the people we love and do our best.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah. And we'll be here each week, learning and unlearning.
Yes.
Lots of things along the way.
There's a lot of work to be done.
Yeah. One of the things that I stumbled across this week that I want to share before we move into talking about our excellent article from Hammer and Hope is a zine that somebody published that's called Hope Does Not Glimmer, It Burns. And it's a short 8-page thing. It just has very nice quotations about hope in it and what hope actually means. And there's Mariam Kaba's in it and several other people whose names just left my mind after I said Mariam Kaba.
Of course.
And so it's a nice zine to recenter and remember that, as Mariam Kaba says, hope is a discipline.
Yes.
You've got to find it along the way.
Absolutely. That's a great rec.
So check that out. Hope does not glimmer, it burns. All right, well, let's move into talking about our article for this week.
Yeah,
it is called The Potential Benefits of Direct Democracy and Voting for Policies, Not Personalities. Very timely.
Yes.
Written by Olúfẹ Táíwò and published in the latest edition of Hammer and Hope, which was released last week before, sometime recently.
Very recently.
Everything's a blur.
Yes.
The article itself is a critique of our representational democracy as it currently exists and an exploration of some direct democracy alternatives, which include referenda, participatory budgeting, citizens' assemblies, and a few other ideas that are very, very briefly mentioned in the concluding paragraph in the article.
Yes.
And one of the things I want to highlight is something that made me laugh out loud when I read it.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yep. And so here's some more jokes for folks, I guess. So the first two sentences conclude with what I consider to be a very high quality joke.
Okay.
So Olúfẹ Táíwò starts the article by saying, on January 20th, 2009, the United States of America inaugurated its first black president, Barack Obama. In November, the U.S. may elect its second. Does this mean anything? One reason to think so, as New York City Mayor Eric Adams reminds us, representation matters.
That's good.
Yeah, I read that. I thought, whoa, Dr. Táíwò's got some jokes.
Uh-huh.
So I literally did laugh out loud because that's clearly a pointed critique at how representational democracy can be manipulated.
Absolutely.
Into meaning, into us ascribing a lot of meaning to a particular individual who doesn't meet those meanings, doesn't meet
Not
that
at all.
So he then continues after that joke with a lot of great analysis throughout the article.
Yes.
Which we should get into now. I'm also curious if that was actually like a joke, as it was.
I'm sure it was.
It feels like a real obvious like joke to me.
But a joke to make a very valid point.
Yes. Yeah, it's not
Right,
it's
yeah.
not superfluous. It
Yes.
makes a very concise point. Yeah. So it feels like he could go on Weekend Update with that.
Yes.
And do well on Saturday Night Live. Anyway, enough of my shenanigans. Where do you want to start with this article?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. There's a lot of great analysis throughout this piece. It was a really incredible thought piece by Olúfẹ Táíwò, and I'm so glad to be able to read more by him and this brilliant man. And so I'm excited for us to talk about this. I think where I want to start is this idea that I was so fascinated by the questions that were at the core of his argument in this piece that all sort of center around and relate to our elections in this country, right? And this idea that our elections could be better and could better serve all of us, right? And that our current political system hasn't truly delivered on the promise of democracy in every sense of that word.
Yeah.
And I just thought that's a thought. That's a real moment to take pause and to think and to sort of, get into this analysis and to consume it. And so
It's a word.
It's a word. And so the questions that Olúfẹ raised were actually at the end of some brilliant analysis that he lays out about our elections and our democracy. So he says this, quote, "One way to move beyond the basic set of assumptions is asking how we could get better representatives. If we had a genuine working class party, say, or even just a viable third party that could break the Democratic Republican stranglehold over the shape of U.S. politics, we could try for new rules to shape the contest between political parties, ranked choice voting to change how candidates craft their appeal to voters, or proportional representation to change how parties share power after elections from a winner-take-all system to one that splits seats between parties. But while we ask those questions, it's worth adding another parallel set. What if elections were different? What if we could vote directly for plans rather than representatives of any party? What if we could represent ourselves, right? And I think those are really valid questions, right? And ideas, given where we find ourselves in this country. And I will admit, I read this I read this before the election happened and the results came out. But, I think we're seeing that this idea or this notion of direct democracy is actively in play in some states. And Olúfẹ lays that out, and I'd love to talk about that a little bit. And I'm really excited to see what comes of that in those places. Yeah. But, this really opened my eyes to a concept that I think is absolutely worth consideration.
Yeah. I think that he lays out that argument really well there. I think that those two questions I highlighted at the end of what you just said, I highlighted as well and said, wow, these are paradigm shifting questions.
Yes, absolutely.
What could we do if we could vote for plans instead of representatives of any party?
Yes.
And what if we could represent ourselves?
Absolutely.
And that feels just like a completely different take on the way that things have been going for a long time here.
Absolutely.
And so one example of direct democracy that he gets into that I thought was fascinating was citizens' assemblies. So Olúfẹ says, quote, "Citizens' assemblies convene a group of citizens chosen by a sortition to discuss and decide matters of public importance, bringing in panels of experts to inform the process. When given a chance to decide together, not as atomized individuals at a polling booth, but as an organized body with responsibility to the public good, a randomly selected group of Irish people did something that surprised the world. And he goes on to talk about how these assemblies were gathered together to explore reproductive rights and then decided to support a national referendum in Ireland, which was then supported, and now access to abortion is a right in Ireland.
Love that.
Which was shocking given the closeness to the Catholic Church that the country has in the history there. But I really love this idea of exploring issues that concern everyone and having folks do research and bringing in experts to inform what solutions might look like or inform what the problem actually is.
Yes.
Because we all have our own ideas of what the problem is, but that's limited to whatever our experience is.
Right.
And so if we can broaden that horizon, understand the problem, then we understand solutions differently too.
Yes.
And when you can then suggest what those solutions are based on that research, based on the experts, and refer that to the public in some form, whether it's a referendum or something. I think it gives people the opportunity to participate in processes and share what their experiences have been alongside learning more about their peers.
Yes.
And then they get to do research into what would actually address the problem instead of
brilliant.
just voting for a guy who says, you know, tariffs are going to solve all your problems at the grocery store and is going to do the opposite.
Yep.
But yeah, it just seems like a fascinating way to really pull at these giant problems that we have where, especially when you think about healthcare, well, the vast majority of the voting public believe that we should all have access to healthcare, but we don't get it. And so where's the disconnect, and what if we had a citizens assembly about healthcare, for example?
Right. The disconnect, I believe, is the politicians standing in the way.
Yeah, it's the politicians, it's the money, it's the stuff. And so how does
Absolutely.
this direct democracy idea, a citizen assembly, address that entirely differently?
This was a really beautiful example for me. I feel like I learned a lot from this, and I think there's a lot of value in this idea that it's real citizens engaged in this procedure, if you will, this process, learning from experts, and also informing it, infusing their lived experiences, and as you say, sort of learning from each other, and then putting it out to the rest of the citizenry to make a decision about. It struck me, and I chuckled at this point when I read that piece about, it's a random group of citizens and they hear from experts. I'm like, it feels like that's what our politicians should be doing, right? That seems like, when we have these testimonies and, at, what do they call those things, right?
The hearings.
Hearings and all of that. And then they just do the opposite in a lot of ways. Or we take just right-wing conspiracy nonsense and use that instead of, real science or real facts.
Those hearings get used as an opportunity for political grandstanding to your base,
Yes,
because
that
you get to clip yourself berating some quote unquote expert,
right?
And it's really just it's
like
theater,
yes,
and
it's
you
theater.
look good to the people who you want to support you, but you're not contributing anything.
Absolutely. Whereas this is real. Hey, there it is. This is real politics, right? And this is what it should look like. And so I really loved that example. You just mentioned money. One of the other things from this piece that was so fascinating to me was Olúfẹmi's analysis around what's wrong with our elections and our electoral process. And a huge one is money, right? And the role that it plays and the influence it has on our politicians and on our elections. And, I agree with everything that he said about this. It's such a huge problem. So I pulled this. He says, quote, "Elections and electoral politics are ultimately a form of deciding together, and much of what's wrong with how elections function in our political system can be traced to whom elections empower and how. From national figures like Kamala Harris to local ones like the Atlanta City Council members, representatives have to run for office, which means they have to court big campaign dollars and avoid confrontation with a well-resourced opposition. We have seen what that kind of confrontation can look like. AIPAC and his allies spent $14 million and $8 million to oust Jamal Bowman and Cori Bush for the crime of being insufficiently deferential to Israel." And we talked a little bit about that on the podcast, but it's that influence of money combined with like the song and the dance that politicians have to do to, as you just mentioned, like appease their constituencies. And really, especially when you're running for president, you have to appease everybody. You can't say anything that offends anyone. And that's just, I think all of that is a huge reason why we have the broken system that we do.
Yeah, and I think, you talked about the constituencies, and I think that there's an element of that, but I think ultimately it's not even whether or not you appease your constituencies, because Jamal Bowman and Cori Bush's constituents weren't really opposed to that. Ultimately, they didn't vote for those people.
Yes.
Like for them again, which I guess goes against what I'm saying. But it was.
No, but I get what you're saying.
They pissed off AIPAC.
Exactly.
And so then AIPAC came after them and said, "Look at this moderate person. We're going to run instead of your," right? and then labeled them as radicals who don't belong in Congress. And that's got nothing to do with your constituents
At all.
So that's an element too, that if we were at a citizens assembly on what to do with our military budget, participatory budgeting, for example, which we'll get into maybe in a little bit, that's a different question. It's different.
Absolutely.
Equation. So one of the most important pieces of enacting more direct democracy that goes into what we're talking about here is the level of influence that people have.
That's right.
And so theoretically, these kinds of systems would level the playing field, as we're talking about, and reduce the amount of influence from groups like AIPAC.
Yes.
And Olúfẹ talks about this in the context of the current skepticism that exists within the electoral processes we have. He says, quote, "But skepticism about how elections function and whom they empower is compatible with recognizing the potential promise of direct democratic votes and decision-making. Unlike city council members, participants in citizens' assemblies or participatory budgeting processes are not running for office. People who own homes or businesses or worship in an area might well have outsized economic interests on some questions relative to others. Under the present system, these people often organize against causes like renewable energy, harm reduction programs, and affordable housing, especially for working class Black folks, and are sometimes suspiciously well funded for their efforts. In a participatory budgeting system, their interests wouldn't grant them any more votes. The shop owner, homeowner, or landlord has the same means of influencing the outcome of a participatory budgeting process that a low-wage employee or renter does, convincing other people."
Yes.
So I really appreciated learning more about these direct democracy processes because they feel very valid to me because of how much they would shift political power and control back to regular people and away from ultra wealthy people and organizations that put their thumbs on the scales however they want. Cough, cough, Elon Musk spent hundreds of millions of dollars on this presidential election.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, again, it puts the power in real people's hands who are directly impacted by the decisions that need to be made and where funding needs to be spent and resources need to be given. And everything about this, like I just kept saying, yes. As I read a paragraph, I'm like, yes, that's it. I love this. You mentioned referenda and sort of other aspects of direct democracy. So I want to talk about that because I really appreciated his analysis around how important it is not just to engage with direct democracy, but to understand the scale and the power of direct democracy. So he says this, quote, "We should understand the scale of what direct democratic procedures have so far accomplished against the sobering backdrop of the status quo. Referenda can be used as a permission structure for the powerful to legitimize their control, especially when done in the absence of genuine public deliberation and consideration of proposals. Even when such consideration happens, as in Ireland, the question of power is paramount. Ireland's Citizens' Assembly officially had only an advisory role, meaning the elected representatives could have simply ignored their proposal, and the Irish are able to amend their constitution via referendum, something we in the U.S. cannot do. Even where directly democratic processes ensure that people have power over funding, the scale of that power often is dwarfed by the power the system keeps for itself. While Seattle's participatory budget processes distributed some $27 million, the government of King County, which includes Seattle, operates on a 2-year budget of more than $15 billion. While direct democratic control over tens of millions of dollars is not quite a rounding error, neither is it, in its current form, as significant as existential challenge to an entrenched political structure that was perhaps hoped for during the height of the 2020 protests, right? And so again, I appreciate that analysis, but I also especially appreciate what he's trying to get us to think about here, which is that not only is direct democracy an important and necessary system, but also that direct democracy needs to have that scale and that power and that influence over budgets and over decisions that affect us, that affect real people and real communities, right?
Yeah. And I think, it's all about scale and power of like, what are we trying to get control over?
Yes.
And how are we going to do that?
Yes.
And I think, those are all great questions and a great additional lens to look at as we think about how you could implement some of these ideas.
Oh,
too.
Absolutely.
All right, let's talk about application. How does this apply to our day-to-day lives and work? I think that this article forces us to think about how we proceed.
Yeah.
We're in a moment where folks are in organizing spaces on the left are going to have to think about how we respond to another Trump presidency. What does it mean to push for things like participatory budgeting or citizens' assemblies in towns and counties across the country as experiments? We talk about how the work toward collective liberation means creating alternatives to what exists, and these feel like ways to experiment with alternatives to the way things have been in this country for a long time, from the beginning of the country. How do we explore these concepts and practice them to make them examples of ways that we could do this on a national scale for the things that matter, that maybe take away some of that executive power? Because that's also one of the things that Trump's presidency in 2020 or 2016 to 2020, actually 17 to 21, highlighted is how much power the executive does have and the balance of that power having been tipped in that direction for a long time.
Right.
And I think that processes like these could restrict the power of the executive branch, before we get to a place of even reimagining what that looks like.
Absolutely. Yeah. Those are such important questions for us to consider. That's a really great analysis and application, I should say. My application comes from the conclusion of this piece. So, I think Olúfẹ really summarizes the potential for direct democracy well at the end of this piece. He says, quote, making political decisions by choosing which Democrat, Republican, or third party will make those decisions for us deserves just as much reconsideration as the two-party system itself. We could make decisions by direct vote or by jury, or we could decide who occupies public office by lottery rather than elections. Any of these can be run better or worse, and some may fit the political and cultural circumstances better than others. But in this time of nationalized politics, where spectacles and celebrities reign, it's important to remember that representation matters. Maybe we should have more opportunities to represent ourselves. And we made that little joke at the beginning about representation, but that is a beautiful summary. That is a beautiful sort of call to action and call for consideration of this. And I think that's the application of all of this. And it's just a really powerful question, especially given what we've experienced in this country to date, what we're about to experience in this country, especially in our current political structure and climate. I think that's definitely a question worth answering.
Yes, absolutely. I love that he brings it from the joke back to the real analysis at the end.
I loved it.
All right. Well, speaking of lotteries for choosing people in public office, let's talk about homework.
Okay.
What do we want to do to continue our learning and unlearning around our conversation today? I want to talk more. I want to read more about choosing representatives by lottery.
Okay.
There's an article linked toward the end in the quote that you just mentioned that is in The Nation, and that article is called Can Lotocracy Save Democracy from Itself?, which is actually a book review by Daniel Steinmetz Jenkins. He reviews a book in the article called Open Democracy, Reinventing Popular Rule for the 21st Century by Helene Landemore. So I just mentioned a lot of stuff. I want to read this article.
Yes.
And it's ultimately an exploration of randomly selecting people to serve in some version of Congress.
Wow.
Which is fascinating to me. So some version of representative democracy, but instead of elections, and you just pull a name out of a hat. So yeah, it's sort of like if the Hunger Games wasn't a genocide, it was sending you in to serve your country in the government.
Yes.
Yeah. So
that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think something like it used to exist like in Greece a long time ago for a limited period of time, but this would obviously be, however it might work would be very different.
I love this. Yeah. I think you should put a pin in this and bring this maybe next month or something.
Yeah.
Like, let's bring this soon and talk about it. I love to learn more about it.
Yeah.
My homework is just to learn from some of the great examples that Olúfẹ provides in this piece, particularly around how direct democracy has been implemented in places in this country and around the world. We mentioned a couple of examples already, Ireland, Seattle. So I'd love to learn more about those. He also mentions the Brazilian Workers' Party in this piece as well. And so I'd love to just click through all of the links in this piece and learn more about the examples of direct democracy in action that, are in place, right? And to see what I can learn from them and about the outcomes of their work and, what more we could do in the work. Yeah.
In the work.
Yes.
Work continues.
It sure does.
It was always going to continue, and it continues. It feels different, though.
Yes.
All right, Damien, you're up next time in our next episode. What are you bringing to the table next week?
Yes. So I am really excited to be bringing our November book to the table for us to talk about.
Yes.
Ooh, I forgot he had that power, folks. The book is called Loving Corrections, and it was written by the one and only Adrienne Marie Brown. So obviously it's a great book that I still have a lot to read between now and next week. Yikes.
I finished. It's great. It's a fantastic.
All right.
It's really good.
Busy week ahead. So here's what AK Press has as the description of this book on their website. Quote, ethical, pondering, and wondrous. Adrienne Marie Brown's Loving Corrections is a collection of love-based adjustments and reframes to grow our movements for liberation while navigating a society deeply fractured by greed, racism, and war. In this landmark book, Brown invigorates her influential writing on belonging and accountability into the framework of Loving Corrections, a generative space where rehearsals for the revolution become the everyday norm in relating to one another. Filled with practical wisdom on how to be a trustworthy communicator while providing bold visions for a shared future, Loving Corrections can speak to everyone caught in the crossroads of our political challenges and potential. No matter how new to the struggle or how numerous our failures, Brown's indispensable writing is an invitation to us all. And I love that description, and I love the connections I can already make to where we are right now, given the election that just happened.
Yep.
But yeah, I know I'm partway through. I know you just said you finished it. I know that this is going to be an incredible book, and so I'm looking forward to our chat about it.
Yeah, me too. It's great. There's a lot in it to be expected. There's some really great analysis too. There are essays that she wrote, columns that she wrote for Yes magazine that are included as well, that are just really good, concise explorations of different things that
awesome.
are all connected, obviously. But yeah, it's really a really great read. I'm looking forward to talking about it more here.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, that's it for today's episode for real this time. So with that, we want to thank you for joining us today. You know what I'm going to ask you to do, but in case you forgot, please follow, leave a rating and review, share our podcast with the people in your life. Follow us on social media, including Instagram and TikTok. Check us out on YouTube. Sign up and join us on Patreon to get notified about any new things we've got going on behind the scenes.
We're also on Blue Sky, so we should mention that
on Blue
too.
Sky.
Yes.
We got some new folks over there, so hello if you're
Yes.
joining us this week. Because I hear that people want more podcasts from men on the left. So hello, we've been here for a few minutes.
Yes, absolutely.
And we welcome anybody and everybody to join us on our interdependent study.
I love that. Absolutely. Well, thank you for listening. Remember, it's not about us, but it is about all of us. And we'll talk to you next week.